Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 3.5-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 20-month-old named Mia. So today's video is going to be a bit of a Q&A style mishmash of a whole bunch of questions that I have been getting over the last couple of months since the school year started. And I do want to just go ahead and dive right into it. So from one busy parent to another, today I'm going to be sharing with you all about my homeschool preparation process as far as putting materials together and just kind of a general update on how things have been going as a first-time Montessori homeschooling parent. So if you've already been following along on our Montessori preschool homeschooling journey thus far, then you have already seen inside of our actual storage closet where I gave you guys a tour of all of the materials and how I have them organized, as well as my actual planning process. And I actually showed you inside my binder and the steps I'm actually taking to plan out my daughter's homeschooling curriculum. And if this happens to be the first of my homeschooling videos that you have come across, then I will be sure to put links to those previous videos in the description box down below so that you can go back and watch those at a later time, because they do go into a lot more depth in those videos than I'm going to in this one today. So I want to start off by just quickly sharing with you how my planning process has evolved over the course of the year so far. And the first major thing was that in the very beginning of the school year, I actually started with a physical paper and pencil homeschool planner that I created myself. And I did give a tour of this in that previous video that I mentioned. So if you are a paper and pencil person and this sounds like something that you would be interested in learning more about, then definitely go back and watch that other video that I mentioned that's linked below, because I actually go through the whole binder and show you what's in it. I am actually still using this to some degree. Actually, you can see on the inside, I still keep all of the materials that I'm going to be prepping for the upcoming week for my daughter, like inside. And I do use the calendars from time to time still. But for the most part, I have actually switched over to more of a digital format. I tend to be a very techie person by nature, so I just found it so much easier to basically recreate a calendar in Google Docs and then just type in my activities from day to day that I could actually link over to any printables and things that I needed to print out. This way I could do it more on the fly as opposed to having to print lots and lots of things ahead of time and then have to go hunt for them later, if that makes sense. So I can print less at once because the links were ready and I could just go and print things a couple of days ahead of time, and it just made more sense to me and my workflow. So I switched over to the digital version for the most part, but I am still keeping my records of my monthly unit planning and things like that in the paper version of my binder. The other part of my planning process that has changed, and I think it's changed for the better because I'm most certainly a lot less stressed out about the planning part now, because I was definitely stressed before. At the very beginning of the school year, I was focusing a lot on unit studies and pulling lots and lots of materials from the internet that all correlated together around a specific topic that we were going to be studying. We started off with reptiles, and then we moved into dinosaurs, and then we had our like autumn, fall, Halloween unit. And then after that, we ended up taking a little bit of a break, which I'll share why in just a minute. And that's kind of where things started to change. I realized that a lot of the activities that I was putting together were very time consuming for me, especially in the evenings with all the other things that I have on my to-do list every single night. And my daughter didn't seem to be getting as much out of them as I originally thought she would. So I kind of almost felt like it was a bit of a waste of time. I hate to use that phrase, but it really did feel like that. And so I backed up and kind of reassessed during our break and came to the conclusion that we were having a much better time, a much more like natural, organic time learning when I just had a small number of those unit study activities kind of interspersed amid all of the standard Montessori learning materials that we have in our home currently. So for example, in the very beginning, when I was very heavy into the unit studies, it would be like reptiles themed language activity on Monday, reptiles themed math activity on Tuesday, reptiles themed science activity on Wednesday, and then a practical life activity that was also reptiles themed on Thursday, and so on, until I got through all of the subjects, and then it would just kind of repeat until I finished the unit study. Versus now, our calendar is more like okay, on Monday, we're gonna work with the movable alphabet, and I might have a set of cards that goes with our technical unit study that we're in, or I might not. We might just use random objects from around the house, or we might use her animal figurines that she's playing with that day. And then on Tuesday, we might solely focus on practical life, just the things that we're naturally doing as part of our everyday routine in the house. And then on Wednesday, if she just seems like she's into counting just kind of naturally, then I might try to pull in some kind of a counting activity, but I'm not stressed about making sure that it's tied to the unit study. And then maybe on Thursday, we'll actually do some kind of a thematic art project of some sort. And doing it that way feels a lot more natural to me. And to be honest, it's a lot less stressful because there are fewer things that I have to make sure that I have prepared ahead of time. It's more of this organic, like give and take, just observing what she's into that particular day and responding to those needs accordingly. And if I'm able to provide an activity that I've planned ahead of time that naturally fits into her interests during that day or during that week, then great. But if not, then it's okay. Whereas before, I kind of felt like we had to do all these activities that I spent so much time planning for. Otherwise, I kind of felt like, ugh, why did I waste all of my time doing it? And I think that that feeling maybe stems from the fact that I am a former teacher, and that was how I used to plan before I discovered the beauty of Montessori. But I'm retraining myself. And so I've learned over time that this is the way that things work better for us, and I think it's going to stay that way from now on. And that's not to say that doing it the old way that I was doing it at the beginning of the school year with like the very regimented unit studies, that's not a bad way to do it at all. I'm not even saying that my way is the right way. I feel like it's a good way for somebody who is new to homeschooling, which I was at the beginning of the school year. It's a good way to dip your toes into the water because it is very structured. It does allow you to have this sense of control, like you know what you're doing. But then I also think that as time goes on and as you become accustomed to what homeschooling feels like and what your personal flow is and your rhythm with your child at home, once you've kind of established that, then you do have this space to kind of like, okay, like take a breath, sit back, reassess, and really decide what's working and what's not. And then that's where you enter this comfort zone where you feel a little bit more accepting of letting go of some things and accepting that not everything is going to be perfect every single day. And the other major reason for why I shifted my homeschooling planning process in the ways that I have is because at the very beginning of the school year, my daughter was enrolled in a brick and mortar preschool that she was supposed to go to in person. And then the pandemic happened. And so we chose to enroll her in the remote learning program that they were offering instead because we didn't and we still don't feel comfortable sending her in person. So she was here doing remote learning with me each morning, and then I was kind of supplementing with all of my homeschooling activities that I have been sharing with you guys. And it very quickly became apparent that remote learning was not my daughter's cup of tea. And I don't blame her, you know, she's 3 years old. I believe I actually did express this ambivalence that I had in a vlog right before the school year started, that I wasn't sure how they could make a preschool program remote because it is so dependent on that social interaction, and how that probably wasn't going to look the same at all. And I was absolutely right. It just was not the same. It did not work for us, and she was not into it. She actually got to this point where she was dreading doing school every morning for the remote program, and I felt like I was dragging her through it, and I put the brakes on. I was like, we're not doing this anymore. And that was when we decided to pull her out of the program for the remainder of the school year and just focus on a much more relaxed and slow, true, authentic homeschooling experience. With that said, I do still plan to send her to the brick and mortar school next year, pending the global health climate being a little bit more under control when that time comes. But for now, we are very much enjoying our homeschooling experience, and things are a lot more like what I imagined they would be. I do want to cap off this like how our planning process has changed section with the actual physical preparation of my materials, because many people have asked me all kinds of very specific questions about the materials that I'm using to make my homeschooling materials. So I will tell you up front, it is nothing fancy. It's very, very straightforward, and I did not go out of my way to acquire anything super special for it. I just used a bunch of things that I had on hand and I made it work. So some of the materials don't require any prep other than putting them out because they're actual like traditional Montessori materials, like the pink tower or our movable alphabet or our sandpaper letters, things like that. So those are just in my homeschooling closet, and when we need them, we pull them out and they're available on the shelves. The only things that I have to really prep ahead of time are things for like practical life work. If we're not doing something that's just part of our day, if I have a special activity planned, then I do have to get those materials prepped and on a tray ahead of time for her, or like art projects, if there's certain materials that I need to like order if I don't have it, or I just need to dig them out of my closet, things like that. But aside from those things, it's really the most time-consuming part of it for me was prepping the printable Montessori activities. And that's another reason why I'm glad that we're doing less of them, because it's less of my time that I'm using on preparation. But with that said, I do still like to prepare some of the Montessori printable activities for her. She does enjoy them, and it's a very easy way to tie in some of those unit study topics just to kind of give everything a cohesive feel when all is said and done. And so when I am prepping those types of activities, I try to do them like a week ahead of time, but that's not always feasible if we're being honest. There are definitely many nights that I am prepping the activity the night beforehand and then sneaking down into the playroom and putting them on the shelf where I want them so that they're there in the morning. It just depends on what my personal work schedule looks like with YouTube and all the other things that I have going on when I actually get to it. But that is what it is. So when I'm prepping the actual printable materials, the first thing you would obviously need is a printer. You can't make printables without a printer. So a long time ago, I had a Canon photo printer, which is what I used to print some of my earlier materials that I've had since Kylie was a lot younger, that I'm now using with Mia. And that thing was fantastic because it was a photo printer and everything came out gorgeous. But there was this lull in time before I started homeschooling where I was not printing anything. And because it was an inkjet printer, I did not know this, but it actually like dried out the entire printer head inside to the point that it was not repairable. Like I tried 50 different ways to repair the thing before I finally gave up, and I could not fix it. So it was basically a fully functional printer that just wouldn't print. And I was so mad at myself for letting that happen because I just didn't even know that that could happen, and it did. So after doing some research and at my husband's suggestion, I ended up investing instead in a Brother color laser printer, primarily because you don't ever have to worry about those kinds of problems happening, but also because the toner on it lasts forever. You can print so many things before it actually runs out of color and have to replace it. So I didn't have to worry about randomly running out of ink in the middle of a print job one night while I'm prepping some of my materials. So that's really nice, and I definitely am so glad that I went that route. The only downside is that the quality of the photographs that my laser printer puts out is not quite as crisp as my Canon photo printer was, because that was a photo printer. That was what it was designed to do. These are, I don't know, they're just a little bit more like washed out, I think. They're not quite as like clean as I would like them to look. But for the purposes of what we're doing here at home, it works perfectly fine. And I think to any regular person, they would be like, there's nothing wrong with these. And that's kind of how I feel. So laser printer is definitely the way to go if you are doing any sort of regular printing for homeschool materials. All right, so once I have printed out the activity and I need to cut things apart, I actually use a paper cutter that I have had since my husband and I got married. I actually made our wedding favors. There were these little tags attached to these jars, and I cut out all the little tags myself, and I needed a paper cutter for it, so I bought it. So this thing has been with me for many years, and it still works just fine. I got it at Michael's. It was probably the cheapest paper cutter that they sold, and it does the job just fine. I also like to laminate a lot of the materials that I make for the girls. I think that's partly the teacher in me. I'm just so used to, like, that was what we did. We laminated everything so that it would last for, you know, 180 students to be working with without being destroyed in a single week. So I like to laminate stuff, but I'm also conscious that every single thing you laminate also adds just that much more plastic to the environment. And I'm not about just, you know, not being eco-conscious at all. So I try to pick and choose what I laminate. If it's something that I'm not sure if it's going to go over well, then I might wait to laminate it until after I've kind of given it a test run. And if it looks like something that was successful that I think I'll reuse in the future with Mia, then I will laminate it after the fact. And then sometimes it's just something that I know I'm gonna reuse, and so I will laminate it. But sometimes there are things that I just decide like, this is probably gonna be a one-time use thing and we'll just recycle it when we're done, and so I don't even bother. So it's kind of on a as needed basis, I guess. But when I do laminate things, I use a very simple, let me grab it, Scotch thermal laminator, like a small one that's just meant for personal or small office use. I've had this since I was a teacher, so it's old enough at this point that they don't even make this model anymore. I think it's the TL901. I've looked for it online, it doesn't exist. I think they have replaced it with a newer model at this point, but it was inexpensive, it was easy to use for home. And then along with the laminator, these thermal laminating pouches that are the same brand as the thermal laminator, Scotch. So once my activity cards are all printed out and cut apart, typically that's it. They just go on the shelf, they're set up in the tray exactly how I want them for the activity, and everything is good to go. But if you've ever laminated anything, you know that the little corners on your cards are very sharp. And there were definitely a couple of times that my daughter complained that they were poking her and she was like, ow, I hurt myself, like while she was doing an activity, and I always felt really bad about it. And I used to just like snip the corners with a pair of scissors, which totally works. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a lot better than the sharp corner. But after that started happening, I started noticing that a lot of the pictures of the cards that I was seeing online that I was printing out had these like beautiful rounded corners, and I was like, how do they get them to look like that? And I discovered this thing. I felt like such a nerd, but I was so excited. It's a corner puncher, and it offers like different sizes. There's like a small corner, so it's like real tight edge, and then there's like a medium size, and then my favorite is the big, large, beautiful edge that I kept seeing. And so I was like, problem solved. And this is honestly like the cheapest thing. I think it was like $8 on Amazon, and it is my favorite tool ever. It's like so satisfying to use. I will demonstrate for you with this random piece of paper that I happen to have on my desk. You just take the sharp corner edge and you can choose which side you do, but I'm gonna do the large one. But you put it right in there, and then you just, and it comes out perfect. I love it. And it works just fine on like thick laminated sheets. So it's awesome if you're looking for the little rounded edges for your activity cards, or if you're just worried about your child poking themselves. And I will put a link to this exact one that I have in the description box down below because I love it so much, along with all of the other things that I just showed you. So the last thing that I want to share with you guys is kind of like the general routine, the flow to our day that we have right now, because I know that so many of you guys have asked me about it, and I have not been ignoring your requests for a homeschool day in the life style video. I just don't feel comfortable sharing that with all of you yet because things have changed for us. They're in a bit of a state of flux because of the fact that we pulled her out of the remote learning program. And I did take like a 2-week hiatus when that happened, just from homeschooling in general. We just took off. We didn't do anything like specifically school related. And so we're kind of hitting the reset button right now, and we don't have like a really smooth flow to our routine just yet. We are getting back into it. What I can share with you is kind of just the general routine to our day. I don't have specific set times around this because I find that it does change from day to day depending on when the girls wake up and how long breakfast takes and whatever else is going on. But generally speaking, it's probably a lot like most of your days. We wake up in the morning, usually sometime around like 7 o'clock, but not always. Sometimes it's a little bit earlier than that, but 7 o'clock is our general wake up time. And then we kind of dilly-dally around upstairs. The girls play for a little bit. Mike and I wake up and get out of bed. And then we eventually kind of meander downstairs into the kitchen where we make breakfast. After breakfast is when we transition into circle time. And I've already shared with you guys what that looks like in a previous video. So if you have not seen that, I will link it down below, all about our circle time routine. But we do that. And then after that is when we transition into what I think most people would consider like a Montessori work cycle. And this is where things start to break down a little bit for us, because Kylie became so like offended by the idea of transitioning into school because of what was going on with the remote learning process that she like dreaded it. And so it was a bit of a battle, if I'm being honest, to get her to sit down and focus for any length of time. And that's when I knew that I needed to back off. So we are starting small again. And right now we have about, I would say maybe a 20-minute work cycle, maybe 25 minutes at this point, if it's something that she's like super engaged in. I did have one morning where we did almost an hour, I think, because she wanted to do this number hunt activity that I actually had left over from her remote learning. But at this point in time, it is a much shorter work cycle that we are slowly working our way up again into something that is a little bit longer. The ideal Montessori work cycle, I'm sure many of you guys know this already, is 3 hours. But for a 3-year-old who has never been to school before and had a really bad first go at it with the remote learning stuff, it's definitely not going to be 3 hours anytime soon, and I have made peace with that. So I just kind of go with our 20 minutes right now. Over the next week or two, we'll transition to like 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and just over time, my plan is to just keep working our way up until she's accustomed to working for like an hour, hour and a half is my goal to get her to before the end of this school year, when we transition hopefully back to a regular brick and mortar preschool setting next year. The other part of that though is that the work cycle is not just necessarily her sitting down doing shelf activities, which is what I think some people mistakenly think a work cycle is. In a homeschool setting, the work cycle is not just shelf activities. It's everything that you're doing at home with your child. So technically speaking, our work cycle is not 20 minutes. Our work cycle is a couple of hours. It's that time between breakfast and circle time and some of her shelf work. And then we transition into like free independent play. Sometimes we go right outside and we do things outside. And that kind of leads us all the way up into lunch, when things tend to slow down a little bit. That is what I would consider our true work cycle to be. And that is about 3 hours long. But if you're just looking at just the shelf work, we are not anywhere near that length of time. And that is also part of the beauty of homeschooling. There are definitely days where I feel like she's just not into it. And if we're being honest, neither am I. And when that happens, we take the day off. Like, it's not a big deal. We take the day off, we take that time to mentally reset, to emotionally reset, and then we try again the next day. And that's something that you can do when you're in a homeschooling situation. You have that freedom. And that is the part of it that I really enjoy. The only part that I'm missing for her is the social aspect right now, because, you know, in a normal homeschooling situation, you would have other homeschoolers and you could go to the park and you could go to the library. Like, you would have social situations where she could still be having that contact. But with the pandemic happening, we're basically just in our own little homeschooling bubble. And we don't know anybody locally that is like quarantining like we are, that we could like pod up with. And I honestly don't even know that I would feel comfortable with that. So I guess my ultimate hope is that she will be able to attend her brick and mortar school next year. But I'm also open to the idea that maybe I fall in love with homeschooling now that we've kind of are doing it the right way, in my opinion. Maybe I'll fall in love with it. Maybe we'll end up homeschooling next year, and then we will be able to find outlets for that social aspect and things will feel a little bit more normal overall. But we'll see. I'm keeping an open mind. So I share all of this with you guys today to hopefully give you the overall message that If your homeschooling experience this year has not been going how you imagined it was going to, rest assured that it's happening to the rest of us too. You are not alone, and we're all just kind of figuring it out as we go, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Your child does not need you to be a perfect teacher, a perfect homeschooling parent for them. They just need you to try the best that you can and to be invested in their learning and their education during the time that you have with them. So if you're doing that, then give yourself a pat on the back. You're on the right track. So that is all I've got for you guys today. If you are interested in learning more about how to do Montessori at home with your children, I do offer a comprehensive e-course that walks you through it step by step. So I will leave a link to that in the description box down below in case you're interested in learning more about it. And just in case you are new to my channel, I also wanted to let you know that this video is part of a much larger series on this YouTube channel called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori at home with your children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.